I pulled into the clinic parking lot for the 6th time that month, my knuckles white against the steering wheel. In the back seat, my daughter Mia sat quietly, her small hand pressed against her nose with yet another tissue already blooming red. "It's okay, sweetheart," I said, forcing calm into my voice. "Dr. Patterson will figure this out." But I didn't believe my own words anymore. We'd been here 5 times in 3 weeks. Blood work, imaging, coagulation panels, allergy tests. Every single result came back normal. Meanwhile, my 8-year-old daughter was bleeding through a box of tissues every other day. "Daddy, it's happening again," Mia whispered. I twisted around to see fresh blood trickling from her left nostril. The tissue in her hand was already saturated. This was the 3rd one today. It was barely noon. My ex-wife Claire had called me dramatic when I first raised concerns. "Kids get nosebleeds, Daniel," she'd said dismissively. "You're overreacting like always." But this wasn't normal. No child should bleed this much, this often. Dr. Patterson entered the examination room with the same practiced smile she'd worn at every previous visit. She was thorough, competent, and clearly as frustrated as I was. "Mr. Chen, I've reviewed all of Mia's test results again," she said, pulling up screens on her tablet. "Platelet count is normal. Clotting factors are normal. No signs of von Willebrand disease. No hemophilia markers. No vascular abnormalities on the imaging. Then why is she bleeding every single day?" The words came out sharper than I intended. Dr. Patterson's expression softened. "I understand your frustration. Sometimes pediatric epistaxis can be idiopathic, meaning we can't identify a clear cause. The nasal passages are delicate, and in some children, 16 nosebleeds in 3 weeks isn't delicate nasal passages," I interrupted. "Something is wrong," she nodded slowly. "I'm going to refer you to Dr. Okonkwo, a pediatric hematologist at Children's Hospital. If there's something we're missing, she'll find it." Another referral, another specialist, another round of tests, while my daughter kept bleeding. The following Tuesday, Claire dropped Mia off at my apartment after her week at her mother's place. Our custody arrangement had Mia alternating weeks between us, a schedule that had worked well enough since the divorce 2 years ago. "How was your week, sweetie?" I asked, pulling Mia into a hug. "Good. Grandma Diane came over lots. She made cookies and we watched movies, and she gave me this." Mia held up her wrist, showing off a delicate silver bracelet with small butterfly charms dangling from it. My stomach tightened. Diane was Claire's mother, and our relationship had been strained since the divorce. She'd made it clear she thought Claire had married beneath herself when she'd chosen a high school math teacher over the lawyers and doctors in her social circle. "That's pretty," I said carefully. "When did Grandma give you that?" "Last Monday. She said it was special, that it belonged to her mother, and now it's mine. I have to wear it every day to keep the family blessing." I examined the bracelet more closely. It was old, probably vintage, with an ornate clasp and delicate filigree work on each butterfly charm. The silver had a slightly tarnished look despite Mia obviously trying to keep it polished. "Have you been wearing it all week?" "Uh-huh. Grandma said I should never take it off, not even for bed or bath. She said the blessing only works if I keep it on." Something cold settled in my chest. I glanced at the calendar on my fridge. The nosebleeds had started 3 weeks ago. The first really bad one had been. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my calendar alerts. Monday, 3 weeks ago, the day after Claire had mentioned her mother coming to visit. It was probably nothing. Correlation wasn't causation. But I couldn't shake the unease creeping up my spine. That night, Mia had 2 nosebleeds before bed. I'd barely gotten the first one stopped before the second started. She fell asleep, exhausted, and I sat in the hallway outside her room, staring at that silver bracelet on her thin wrist and trying to talk myself out of paranoia. Thursday afternoon, I took Mia to Confederation Park, despite the October chill. She needed normalcy, needed to be a kid instead of a patient. She ran ahead to the playground while I followed, coffee in hand, watching her climb the equipment with the careful attention of a parent who'd spent too many hours in medical waiting rooms. "Your daughter's very energetic." I turned to find an elderly man on the bench beside mine. He wore a heavy cardigan and wire-rimmed glasses, a paperback folded in his weathered hands. He had the look of a grandfather enjoying retirement in the autumn sun. "She's a good kid," I said, offering a polite smile before returning my attention to Mia. "That's a beautiful bracelet she's wearing. Vintage craftsmanship. You don't see work like that anymore." I glanced at him. surprised he'd noticed such a small detail from this distance. It was her grandmother's family heirloom. The man was quiet for a moment, his eyes still on Mia as she slid down the slide. Then he leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping. Has she been ill lately? Every muscle in my body tensed. Why would you ask that? I'm sorry. I don't mean to pry. It's just, I spent 40 years as a research chemist before I retired. Old habits die hard. I couldn't help but notice that the bracelet's patina is unusual. Silver tarnishes to black or gray typically, but that piece has an almost greenish discoloration in places. That can indicate copper contamination. Or, he trailed off, seeming to reconsider his words. Or what? My heart was pounding now. The man met my eyes. Or deliberate alloying with metals that shouldn't be worn in prolonged skin contact. Some antique jewelry was made with compounds that we now know to be toxic. Lead, arsenic, even mercury, were sometimes used in decorative metalwork. My mouth went dry. Are you saying that bracelet could be poisoning my daughter? I'm saying it's possible. If she's been experiencing unexplained symptoms, particularly anything involving bleeding or bruising, it would be worth having the piece analyzed. Modern testing can identify the elemental composition quite easily. I was already standing, calling Mia's name. She ran over, confusion on her small face. Sweetie, I need you to take off the bracelet for a minute. But Grandma said, I know what Grandma said. Just for a minute, please. She reluctantly unclasped it and handed it over. I held it up to the light, examining it more closely than I had before. Now that the chemist had mentioned it, I could see the greenish tinge he'd described, particularly around the clasp and the points where the charms connected to the chain. There's a private lab on Bank Street, the man said, writing something on the corner of his book page and tearing it off. A colleague of mine runs it. Tell him Gregory sent you. He can do a full spectrometric analysis within a few hours. I took the paper, my hand shaking slightly. Thank you. I don't know if this is anything, but thank you. I hope I'm wrong, Gregory said quietly. But if I'm not, don't let her wear that again until you know for certain. I drove straight to the lab, Mia confused and asking questions I couldn't answer yet. The bracelet was in a plastic bag in my pocket, and I could feel its weight like lead. The lab technician was skeptical until I mentioned Gregory's name. Then he became serious, professional, and concerned. We can do a full elemental analysis using XRF spectrometry, he explained. If there are any toxic metals present, we'll identify them. Give me 3 hours. Those 3 hours felt like 3 days. I took Mia for ice cream, helped her with homework, played card games, all while my mind raced through possibilities. Was I losing my mind? Was I really accusing my ex-mother-in-law of poisoning our daughter with jewelry? But the nosebleeds, the timing, the insistence that Mia never remove the bracelet. My phone rang at 6:47 p.m. Mr. Chen, you need to bring your daughter to the emergency room, immediately, the technician said, without preamble. And you need to bring this bracelet as evidence. I'm calling the police. My legs nearly gave out. What did you find? The bracelet is heavily contaminated with thallium. It's been deliberately added to the alloy, particularly concentrated in the areas that would have the most skin contact. Mr. Chen, this isn't an accident. Someone modified this piece specifically to poison whoever wore it. The emergency room moved with controlled urgency once I explained the situation. They drew blood, started IV fluids, administered Prussian blue as a chelating agent to help eliminate the thallium from Mia's system. A police officer took my statement while I watched my daughter through the window of her room, an IV in her small arm, finally understanding why she'd been suffering. Thallium poisoning is incredibly rare, the ER doctor explained. It causes bleeding disorders, hair loss, neurological symptoms. If you hadn't discovered this when you did, the damage could have been permanent, even fatal. I called Claire from the hospital. She answered on the third ring, irritation in her voice. Daniel, I'm in the middle of dinner with... Mia's in the hospital. Your mother poisoned her. The silence that followed was absolute. What are you talking about? Have you lost your mind? The bracelet your mother gave Mia was contaminated with thallium. Deliberately. The police are involved. You need to come to Children's Hospital right now. I could hear her breathing, rapid and shallow. That's impossible. My mother would never. Claire, our daughter has been bleeding for 3 weeks because she's been wearing a poisoned bracelet. Come to the hospital, now. She arrived 40 minutes later, her face pale, her hands shaking. We stood outside Mia's room while Detective Marlowe explained the situation in clinical terms that made the horror of it somehow worse. Thallium sulfate was once used in rat poison, he said. It's been banned for decades, but it's still available through certain channels. The amount present in the bracelet was calibrated to cause chronic exposure rather than acute poisoning. Someone wanted your daughter to suffer long term. Why would my mother do this? Claire's voice broke. It doesn't make any sense. But I was already thinking about Diane's behavior over the past few years. Her resentment about the divorce. Her constant comments about how I wasn't good enough for Claire, wasn't providing enough for Mia. Her suggestion 6 months ago that Claire should sue for full custody. Detective, I think you should look into Diane's finances, I said slowly, and whether she took out any insurance policies on Mia recently. Claire's head snapped toward me. You think she wanted to kill Mia for money? I think we need to find out. The investigation moved quickly once police obtained warrants. What they found in Diane's home office was damning and disturbing in equal measure. Purchase records for thallium sulfate from an online chemical supplier. Emails with a jeweler about modifying an antique bracelet. And most chillingly, a life insurance policy on Mia for $500,000, taken out 4 months earlier, with Diane listed as beneficiary. There was also a journal. Detective Marlowe read excerpts to us in a private conference room, his voice carefully neutral. But the words themselves were anything but neutral. She writes about how you destroyed her daughter's life by being inadequate, he said, looking at me. How Claire deserved better. How Mia would be better off raised by her grandmother if you were out of the picture entirely. The entries become increasingly hostile toward you over the past year. But why hurt Mia? Claire whispered. If she hated Daniel, why hurt our daughter? Marlowe flipped to another page. She seems to have convinced herself that if Mia became seriously ill, you would blame Daniel for his paranoia and overreaction, that it would demonstrate his unfitness as a parent. She expected Mia to become chronically ill, for you to seek full custody, and for her to then have access to both her granddaughter and eventually the insurance payout, if the illness proved fatal. She writes about correcting the mistake of your marriage. I felt like I was going to be sick. Claire was crying silently, her hands covering her face. She's being charged with attempted murder, child endangerment, insurance fraud, and several other counts, Marlowe continued. The Crown Attorney expects this to be a strong case. The evidence is overwhelming. Diane was arrested at her home in Rockcliffe Park 3 days later. She maintained her innocence at first, claiming the bracelet must have been contaminated accidentally, that she'd had no idea. But faced with the chemical purchase records, the jeweler's testimony, her own journal entries, and the insurance policy she'd forged Claire's signature on, she eventually stopped talking altogether and requested a lawyer. The trial was mercifully swift. The evidence was irrefutable. Security footage showed Diane purchasing the thallium. The jeweler testified about her specific instructions to treat the bracelet's interior surfaces. The metallurgical analysis proved deliberate contamination. Her journal provided the motive. She was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison. Claire and I sat through every day of the trial. Our daughter was safe, recovering well, her blood work finally normalizing after weeks of chelation therapy. But the emotional scars would take longer to heal. I should have seen it, Claire said one night as we sat in my apartment, checking on Mia together after she'd fallen asleep. My own mother. I should have known. How could you know? I asked. Parents are supposed to protect their children, not hurt them. Grandparents are supposed to love their grandchildren, not poison them. Nothing about this makes sense. She hated you that much. She hated the idea of someone she considered beneath you being the father of her grandchild. But Claire, that hate was her choice, her sickness, not anything you could have prevented. We'd been co-parenting better since the incident, counseling together, putting Mia first, trying to help our daughter process the betrayal by someone who was supposed to love her unconditionally. Mia started seeing a child psychologist twice a week. She had nightmares sometimes about the hospital, about the bracelet, about her grandmother, but she was resilient in the way children can be, finding joy again in the small things, trusting again with careful steps. 6 months after Diane's sentencing, we were back at Confederation Park. Mia ran ahead to the same playground, the same slide, the same swings. But she was different now, healthier, certainly. The nosebleeds were gone, her energy returned. But there was a wariness in her that hadn't been there before. A lesson learned too young about the complexity of human nature. I saw Gregory on the same bench, reading another paperback in the spring sunshine. "Mr. Chen," he said with a gentle smile, "how is your daughter?" "She's going to be okay, thanks to you." He shook his head. "I simply noticed something unusual. You're the one who acted on it. If you hadn't said something, if you'd just minded your own business like most people would have," I couldn't finish the sentence. 40 years studying the properties of elements teaches you that some things are toxic at any dose, Gregory said quietly. "I'm glad I trusted my instincts." I sat down beside him. "Can I ask you something? Why did you say anything? You didn't know us. You could have just walked away." He was quiet for a long moment, watching Mia play. "I had a granddaughter once. She died when she was 9. Leukemia. I spent years studying chemistry, working with compounds and elements, trying to understand the world at its most fundamental level. But I couldn't save her. When I saw your daughter with that bracelet, something in my training recognized a problem. Maybe I couldn't save my own granddaughter, but I could at least say something. That's all any of us can do, isn't it? See something wrong and choose not to look away." "Thank you for not looking away." He nodded, turning back to his book. I stayed on the bench for a while, watching Mia laugh as she played with other children, the late afternoon sun turning her hair golden. She wore no jewelry now, no bracelets or necklaces. Just a simple watch Claire and I had given her for her 9th birthday, carefully tested and cleared of any contamination. That night, after Mia was asleep in her room with the nightlight on and her favorite stuffed bear, I sat at my kitchen table and wrote down everything I'd learned. Not for a book or an article, but for Mia. For when she was older and could understand the full complexity of what had happened. The lessons were hard ones, but they were real. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong with your child's health. I'd known something wasn't right, even when doctors couldn't find the cause. Persistence saved Mia's life. Not all danger comes from strangers. The person who tried to harm my daughter was her own grandmother, someone we should have been able to trust completely. We teach children about stranger danger, but we rarely prepare them for the betrayal of someone close. Document everything. The timeline I'd kept of Mia's symptoms, the medical records, even my calendar notes about when the bracelet appeared, all became crucial evidence. In situations involving children's safety, documentation can be the difference between being believed and being dismissed. Don't be afraid to question authority, even family authority. Diane had used her position as grandmother, as a respected member of the community, to gain trust and access. Claire and I had both been conditioned to defer to her, to accept her gifts and her involvement without question. That deference nearly cost Mia her life. Listen to experts, even unexpected ones. Gregory had no obligation to speak to me. I could have dismissed him as a nosy stranger. Instead, I listened, and that choice saved my daughter. Mental illness and toxic resentment can hide behind respectable facades. Diane was a pillar of Ottawa society, volunteered at charities, attended church, presented herself as the perfect grandmother. Behind that facade was someone capable of methodically poisoning a child. We need to be alert to warning signs even, or especially, in people who seem beyond reproach. Children are more resilient than we think, but they need support to process trauma. Mia's recovery wasn't just physical. The therapy, the honest conversations appropriate to her age, the stability Claire and I provided together, all contributed to her healing. Co-parenting means putting aside personal differences for your child's welfare. Claire and I had our issues. Our divorce had been difficult, but when Mia needed us both, we found a way to work together. That unity helped her feel safe again. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is pay attention. Gregory noticed an unusual discoloration on a bracelet most people wouldn't have looked at twice. That attention, that willingness to engage rather than ignore, started the chain of events that saved Mia. The justice system doesn't always move quickly, but it can work when evidence is clear. Diane's conviction didn't happen overnight, but the documentation, the scientific evidence, and the testimony combined to hold her accountable. Healing takes time, and that's okay. 6 months later, Mia still had nightmares sometimes. Claire still struggled with guilt. I still felt rage when I thought about what Diane had done. But we were all healing, step by step, day by day. I finished writing and closed my notebook. Through the wall, I could hear Mia's soft breathing, the peaceful sound of a child sleeping safely. No nosebleeds tonight. No poison seeping into her bloodstream. Just my daughter, alive and recovering. Because sometimes people notice things, and sometimes parents trust their instincts, and sometimes strangers speak up instead of looking away. The bracelet was in police evidence lockup, where it would remain as long as necessary. Diane was in prison, where she would stay for a very long time. And Mia was home, where she was safe, loved, and healing. 3 weeks later, Claire and I met with a family therapist who specialized in helping children process trauma from trusted adults. Dr. Rashid was patient and insightful, helping Mia understand that her grandmother's actions weren't her fault, weren't because of anything Mia had done or been. Children often internalize blame, Dr. Rashid explained to us privately. Mia may wonder if she was a bad granddaughter, if she did something to deserve this. We need to consistently reinforce that this was about Diane's choices, not about anything Mia did wrong. It was a long road. There were setbacks and hard days. There was the afternoon Mia saw an elderly woman at the grocery store who looked like Diane and had a panic attack. There was the night she asked me, tears streaming, if I was sure the bracelet was really gone, really couldn't hurt her anymore. But there were good days too. Days when Mia laughed freely and played without looking over her shoulder. Days when she talked about her future without the shadow of trauma darkening her words. Days when she was just a kid again, worried about math homework and playground politics and whether we could get a dog. "Dad?" she asked one evening as I tucked her into bed. "Yeah, sweetie? That man at the park, the one who told you about the bracelet. Can we find him again? I want to say thank you." We went back to Confederation Park every Thursday afternoon for 2 months before we saw Gregory again. When we did, Mia ran up to him before I could stop her. "Excuse me, sir. My dad says you're the reason I'm not sick anymore." Gregory looked startled, his book falling to his lap. "Oh, well, I'm glad you're feeling better, young lady. I made you this," Mia said, pulling a folded piece of paper from her jacket pocket. It was a crayon drawing of a man on a bench, a little girl on a playground, and between them a speech bubble with the words, "Thank you for noticing." Gregory's eyes grew misty as he took the drawing with gentle hands. "This is beautiful. Thank you, Mia. How did you know my name?" He smiled. "Your father mentioned it when we spoke. You're very brave, you know." I didn't feel brave. I felt scared. Being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means doing what needs to be done even when you're frightened. You went through something very difficult, and you're still here, still smiling, still making art for grumpy old chemists. That's bravery. Mia beamed at him, then ran back to the playground, her mission accomplished. "She's remarkable," Gregory said. "She is. Thanks to you. Thanks to everyone who paid attention when it mattered, including you." I sat beside him one last time. "I keep thinking about what you said before, about your granddaughter, about how you couldn't save her, but you could say something about Mia. Do you think she would have liked knowing she helped save another child?" Gregory smiled, sad but genuine. "I think Emma would have insisted I speak up. She was quite bossy, my granddaughter, had strong opinions about right and wrong, even at 9. So yes, I think she would have approved. I'm sorry you lost her. So am I, every day. But I've learned that loss doesn't mean the end of purpose. Emma taught me that kindness matters, that paying attention matters, that we're all responsible for each other in small ways. I try to honor her by living those lessons." We sat in comfortable silence, watching Mia play. Two men connected by a moment of observation that had changed everything. A year after Diane's sentencing, Mia's last chelation test came back completely clear. No trace of thallium remained in her system. Her hair, which had thinned during the poisoning, was thick and healthy again. Her energy was boundless. She'd made honor roll at school and joined the soccer team. She was, by every measure, thriving. Claire and I celebrated with her favorite dinner and a cake that said 1 year stronger. Mia blew out the candles and made a wish she wouldn't share, but the smile on her face told me it was a good one. "Mom, Dad," she said as we cleaned up, "can I ask something?" "Of course, honey," Claire said. "I've been thinking about what happened with Grandma Diane, and I think maybe something good can come from it." I glanced at Claire, curious and concerned. "What do you mean?" "We learned something important, right? That sometimes people who are supposed to love you might hurt you instead. And that it's okay to question things even if adults tell you not to. And that strangers can be heroes if they pay attention. That's true, I said carefully. So maybe I could talk to other kids about it, like at school or something, so they know it's okay to tell people if something feels wrong, even if it's family making them feel that way. Claire's eyes filled with tears, but they were proud tears. Oh, sweetheart, that's a beautiful idea. Dr. Rashid says turning our pain into purpose can help heal it, Mia continued. And I'm tired of being scared all the time. I want to be brave like that man, Gregory said. The kind of brave that helps people. 3 months later, Mia and I visited her school to talk to her class about recognizing unsafe situations, even from trusted adults. The school counselor mediated, keeping it age appropriate, focusing on empowerment rather than fear. Mia told her story with remarkable composure. She talked about how she'd felt when she was sick, how confused she'd been, how the adults in her life had worked together to help her. She talked about Gregory noticing something wrong and speaking up. She talked about how it's always okay to question things that don't feel right. Even if it's someone you love, she said clearly. Even if they get mad at you for asking. Your safety is more important than being polite. After the presentation, 3 children stayed back to talk to the counselor privately. One about an uncle whose hugs felt wrong. One about a babysitter who said things that scared them, but told them not to tell their parents. One about a neighbor who gave them gifts and said it was their secret. 3 children found the courage to speak up because my daughter chose to turn her trauma into advocacy. The counselor called me that evening. I want you to know what Mia did today may have saved those children from escalating abuse situations. Her bravery gave them permission to speak. I told Mia what the counselor had said. She cried, but they were good tears. See, she said. Something good did come from it. 2 years later, we were back in Dr. Patterson's office for a routine checkup. Mia was 10 now, healthy and strong, with no lingering physical effects from the thallium poisoning. Her blood work is perfect, doctor, Patterson said, reviewing the results. Honestly, if I didn't have the files from 2 years ago, I'd never know she'd been through something so serious. Kids are resilient, I said, watching Mia color in a drawing in the corner. They are. But they need adults who believe them and advocate for them. Dr. Patterson looked at me seriously. You saved your daughter's life by trusting your instincts when all the medical evidence said nothing was wrong. That persistence mattered. A stranger at a park saved my daughter's life by paying attention to details and speaking up. I corrected. I just listened. Sometimes that's the hardest and most important thing we can do. Listen. Pay attention. Act when something feels wrong. Mia finished her drawing and brought it over. It showed our family, now including Claire's new partner Marcus, who'd been patient and kind as Mia learned to trust again. In the picture, we were all holding hands, smiling, safe. Can we get ice cream after this? Mia asked. Absolutely, I said. As we left the clinic, Mia slipped her hand into mine. Dad, I'm glad you didn't give up when the doctors couldn't find what was wrong. I'm glad you're okay, sweetheart. That's all that matters. And I'm glad you taught me that it's okay to question things. Even family. Especially family. Always trust your instincts, Mia. If something feels wrong, it probably is. You have permission to speak up, to ask questions, to demand safety. That's not being rude or disrespectful. That's being smart. She nodded seriously, then brightened. Can we go back to Confederation Park this weekend? I want to see if Gregory is there. I made him a new drawing. We did go back that weekend. Gregory wasn't there, but we left the drawing tucked into a plastic sleeve under a rock on his usual bench, with a note that said, "Thank you for paying attention. You're my hero, Mia." The next week, the drawing was gone. In its place was a pressed 4-leaf clover in a small frame, with a note in careful handwriting, for luck and for remembering that noticing matters. Keep being brave. Gregory. Mia hung the framed clover in her room, right beside the certificate she'd received from her school for her safety presentation. They were symbols of survival, of courage, of the connection between a child who suffered and the stranger who chose not to look away. Every night when I tucked Mia into bed, I looked at those reminders of how close we'd come to losing her. And every night, I was grateful for grandmothers who weren't grandmothers at all, for strangers who became heroes, for my own stubborn refusal to accept that nothing was wrong when everything felt wrong. The bracelet stayed in evidence lockup. Diane stayed in prison. And my daughter stayed alive, learning to transform trauma into purpose, fear into courage, and near tragedy into a lesson about the power of paying attention. Because sometimes the difference between a child living and dying is someone noticing a slight green discoloration on a piece of jewelry. Sometimes it's a father who trusts his instincts over test results. Sometimes it's a mother who chooses to believe the impossible truth over the comforting lie. And sometimes it's a 10-year-old girl who decides that her suffering can have meaning if it helps other children find the courage to speak up, to question, to demand safety, even from those who are supposed to provide it unconditionally. That's the story I'll tell her when she's older, when she asks me what I learned from the worst experience of my life. I learned that love sometimes looks like paranoia until it's proven right, that strangers can show more care than family, that persistence in the face of dismissal can save a life, that children are both more fragile and more resilient than we give them credit for. And most importantly, I learned that we are all responsible for each other in small ways. A chemist noticing contamination, a father demanding answers, a mother accepting hard truths, a child choosing courage over silence. We're all Gregory on that bench, faced with the choice to speak up or walk away. The measure of our humanity is in which choice we make when no one would blame us for staying silent. My daughter is alive because someone chose to speak. I hope when faced with similar choices, we all find the courage to do the same.